All right, folks, welcome to the election protection training for 2014 in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm Pam Wilmot. I'm Executive Director of Common Cause Massachusetts, and I've been doing election protection, I think, for 8 cycles now, so for a long time, mostly here in Massachusetts, but also in Ohio, at least in 2008, which was a lot of fun. So we're going to watch a presentation shortly, and we're going to go through this. You will not be able to actually, you're not going to be able to ask questions until we get to the end. You can type things in the chat panel, which I think I can see, but this is a relatively new format, so I haven't done it before. It's not as intuitive as the other meeting format, so apologize if you do have questions. Try to write them down. We will have time for them. This will make, if we don't have questions, we'll go through it very quickly. Election protection is a national coalition with more than 100 partners and more than 28 different states across the country that actually have local programs. The 1866 Our Vote hotline is the centerpiece. So today we're going to go over the what election protection is, your role as a poll monitor, and then we're going to go into Massachusetts election laws, the issues that you're likely to come up, and some of the scenarios that you're going to have to deal with. It's a lot of material. A recording of this webinar and also the previous one I did, and then 2 that Sophia Hall from the Lawyers Committee did, are available online. We will, if you haven't gotten an email from either me or Sophia, you will, that contains that information. So we run election protection every year, every election cycle, because there have been so many issues nationwide. And every year voters are disenfranchised because of a number of voting issues. Of course, there's the direct and ones that are the most concerning, like voter challenges and list purges and voter suppression. But then there are also just very basic confusion over what election rules are, lack of resources at certain polling places, and poll worker error, poll worker misbehavior. All of these things combined to disenfranchise voters, and your job is to help ameliorate that situation. So we ensure that voters have know what their rights are, and we provide them with information. We identify problems and solve them, working with a coalition both here locally and nationally. And then we gather information so that we can help solve the problems in a systemic fashion going forward. It's the largest voter protection coalition in the country that's nonpartisan. In fact, I'd say at the moment it's pretty much the only one. It is managed nationally by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Common Cause. We received over 125,000 calls in 2012, but actually like 186,000 in 2016. It was started in 2000 by the Lawyers Committee and has been going ever since. I started in 2004 working on it. Okay. On Election Day, the coalition supports voters and solves problems. As I said, the hotlines are the centerpiece. There are a number of them. The primary one is the 1866 Our Vote hotline, which is the English version. The next slide will go through the various other hotlines and with different speaking. Of course, the Spanish language is also one of the more heavily used lines, but we also have Asian languages as well as Arabic languages. We can have both legal and non-legal field as well as call center deployments. We solve problems. We even go to litigation if necessary. And as I said, we try to create this clear picture so that we can solve the problems going forward. Here in Massachusetts, our local leadership is the Lawyers Committee, Common Cause, Mass Vote, the League of Women Voters, ACLU, and Anti-Defamation League. Most of the voters, we'll probably have about 300 volunteers in the field this time, and that's quite a bit. So here's sort of the flow chart. It's not a perfect one, but it gives you a sense of all the different steps of the of what we're doing. We have a national command center where the phones are actually routed through, then they're routed back out to local call centers where folks are, and local command centers, both of them. A command center is just sort of the people who are calling the shots, and the call center are people that are answering the phones. And then the people that are interacting with the voters themselves are you, the volunteers on the ground, as well as the local call centers, and to a certain extent the national call centers. But you are really our eyes and ears in the first line. Here is the different languages that I mentioned. We have the capability that in our local command center, in call center, we'll only be doing English. The other languages will be on a national basis. So what is your role? As I said before, your role is primarily to be the eyes and ears of the coalition. And you are going to be reporting things that you see back to the command center that will be staffed by heads of the various organizations and led by Sophia Paul at the Lawyers Committee and me, Pam Wilmot from Common Cause. You'll have a sheet that has the primary numbers. There's also a slide that puts them all together at the end. But if you can only have two numbers with you, they should be the command center number, 617-526-6882, and of course the 1-866 Our Vote hotline. That number will also, you'll be able to reach us as well, but that was sort of a diffused way of going about it, and we'll also give you our cell phone. So you're also can be a resource for voters, letting them know their rights, asking basic questions about things like, when do the polls close? If it's towards the end, can I stay in line? Where am I registered to vote? You can help them look that up. We'll talk about that later. And of course, refer voters for more information to the 1-866 Our Vote hotline. So this is an agreement that we're asking all poll monitors to sign. There is a version of it in both the Google Doc folder and on the Common Cause website. There's one part that actually was not updated. You can wear a t-shirt and a pin this time. Last two election cycles, they have not let us do that. This time we can. But the bottom line is that we want you to be adhere to our nonpartisanship agreement, and to act in a professional manner, in a non-controversial manner, non-confrontational manner, not challenging any voter, interfering, or otherwise misbehaving. We don't want a confrontation. Everything should be very peaceable, and any problems sort of referred back so that things don't get out of control. If we're going to have a problem, we will solve it with local administrators, with the Secretary of State, or if necessary, even with a court. So your role as a poll monitor, one is a mnemonic, or observe, assist, and record. So observing, you gather information. We have actually a little survey that we're asking you to fill out about the polling places that deals with accessibility issues, and then sort of the general operations, whether you saw bilingual poll workers there, whether the poll workers were courteous, whether you saw any challenges. And then also there's some intake forms just in general about what kinds of things that you observed. If there's any systemic problems at all, we want to know them at the command center. But if there are, individual problems, the hotline is the one that will mostly solve those. We don't have an exit poll this year. So the first thing you do as a poll monitor is to sort of take a look around, maybe make some notations for your polling place assessment, and then go inside and introduce yourself to the warden or election supervisor. The warden is the person that's in charge. Tell them that you are an observer. Sometimes they call them a poll watcher, but observer is the normal terminology. And that you're from the Election Protection Coalition, that we've written and talked to the Secretary of State and with the town clerk or the election commissioner, and this is something that you have the right to do. There's a different role for you when you're inside and outside, and we'll get into that in a minute. So we do hope to have potentially somebody on the inside, someone on the outside. Part of it depends on the weather. You are allowed to be inside the 150 feet boundary because you are not electioneering. You are not talking to anyone about ballot questions or the candidates. And so you are allowed to both be inside and outside within that boundary. When you're outside, your goal is to make sure that voters have the information that they need. And so there's some palm cards that you can print out that talk about knowing your rights. You can hand those out. You can assist voters if they ask for help, or if somebody looks like they're having trouble or came out and frustrated, you can say, would you mind sharing your experience with me? I might be able to help. From the Election Protection Coalition, and we have the 1-866 Our Vote hotline, where legal volunteers are standing ready to help people. But of course, we never harass people or insist that they do tell us. When you're inside, you are just an observer. You are not allowed to interact with voters at all. If you see them having a problem, you cannot interrupt the poll worker. You cannot tell them they're doing it wrong. You cannot go up to the voter over the table and say, here, I can help you. You need to sit there and quietly listen, observe, take it down. And then if somebody is turned away or walks out, you can follow them out and deal with them outside of the polling place problem. But so if there's something that's being done inside the polling place, so a poll worker is misbehaving and telling voters how to vote on ballot questions, or turning people away without giving them provisional ballots, or without checking to see if they're on the inactive list. We want to know that in the command center, because that's a systemic problem that's going to affect everybody else in the same situation as that polling place. Often the warden isn't aware of it. Almost never is the election official of that community aware of it. And they're often horrified and shocked and will help solve the problem. But we are the ones that will do that and not you. So our priority locations this time are in Boston, Brockton, Randolph, Chelsea, Lawrence, Lowell, Springfield, Worcester, and we may have a few smatterings of folks other places. We have written to these communities and told them that we will be there. You should have gotten a shift. If you haven't, it will be forthcoming very soon. We try to put people with someone else and give them more than one polling place so they can decide amongst themselves how they want to cover that polling place, whether you want to have someone inside and outside, or you want to split up and go to different places. It's really up between you and your teammate how you want to cover those polls. So when you're a poll monitor, you need to bring a number of things. A very important thing is a cell phone, a smartphone where you can look things up, a charger to ensure that you're charged up all day, especially if you're there for longer than a 4-hour shift, which not very many people will be. You want your assessment survey, intake forms, the information sheet so you make sure you don't forget these important numbers, maybe some palm cards to hand out, your election protection button, some snacks and water, and comfortable shoes. All this information is available for download at the Common Cause website, and also at a Google Doc. And again, we'll get you those links via email, and there's also at the end of this presentation. So inside monitors need to be very quiet and unobtrusive. You need to mute your phone. You cannot talk on it. You cannot make a photograph of what's happening. You cannot make a video of it. You need to be very, very, really just be an observer. If you're on the outside, you can answer questions, like we said, that are on the polling card, which are about like election hours and what time you had to register to vote, and help look people up and stuff. But in general, we want you to stay in contact with us and keep us informed of what's happening. So here is the scenarios and issues. You know what, yeah, we'll go through this. And if we have questions, we can go back to certain slides if we need to. So election law issues and scenarios. We have here some of the most important issues are around voter registration. We won't cover much about early voting. That is happening and ending actually tomorrow. Having residency and inactive voters, voter identification, provisional voting, assistance at the polling place, election equipment and ballots, as well as a few other things, including voter challenges and deceptive practices. We're a little worried about that in Lowell and Lawrence. We don't see it very often in Massachusetts, but it does happen occasionally, and we're a little worried that it might happen this time. So what are the qualifications to register for vote in Massachusetts? You must be a U.S. citizen. You must be a resident of the city or town of Massachusetts where you are located, and the precinct. You must be 18 years old on or before Election Day and not be incarcerated under guardianship or convicted of voter fraud. Your registration needed to be postmarked by October 17th, 2018. So 20 days before the election. If a voter has moved, they have 6 months from which they can vote at their old address without re-registering. If they've re-registered, they can't pick which one they want to go to. They have to go to their new one. If they've come from out of state, they don't have any grace period. The 6-month rule applies from any city or town. You can move halfway across the state, all the way across the strait, or across the street. So some of the issues about voter registration, it might be that somebody registered and their name was not on the rolls. That can happen for a lot of different reasons. If your name isn't on the rolls, it could be a registration issue, or it could be a clerical issue. In Cambridge one year, they had the polling list printed by a vendor, and every third name was missing. They had given them 3 discs, and one of them got lost or didn't get inputted. And they just, we discovered that fairly early. It was reported to us. We weren't the only ones. Well, the administrators noticed it too. But they did get new polling books back out to the locations. But there was also another one sometime where there was a confusion over some of the, they get marked if they're veteran, and some of those were missing. Anyway, it can be a clerical error. It can be that the voter is actually at the wrong polling place. They didn't tell you that they had moved and they actually hadn't re-registered. Or it could be that they're actually are registered but are inactive. That's a whole nother issue, and we're going to deal with that in a minute. So if a voter believes she's properly registered but her name doesn't appear on the rolls, what do you do? the first important thing, and if you're interacting with them, obviously, if they're across the table and you're observing, you can't do anything. But until they get outside, you want to gather as much information and get the background so that you know. Some of the important things to know is, you know, is this a first-time voter? Where and when did you register? Have you moved? Did you receive a confirmation card, or did you answer the census? But one of the easiest things is to look up whether the person is in the right precinct, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. It would be easier actually if I did a whole lookup, but I'm just going to show you a slide and let you play with it yourself. So there are different rules about being a first-time voter versus another, and plus, if you're a first-time voter and you've just registered, there's a higher likelihood that something happened with your registration. Maybe it didn't come in time, maybe it wasn't actually postmarked in time, all sorts of things like that. So always look if the name is having, you know, if you look them up, you'll get all the information. But again, in order to help them, you'll want to get the information together as much as you can. If no one confirmed that they're registered, you can't find them on the list, they're not an inactive voter, and that puts on a separate list, they are entitled to get something called a provisional ballot, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that. And they also are entitled to find out whether that ballot was counted. But it's a ballot of last resort, and everyone gets a chance to use it. Unfortunately, it will only count. It will only be added to the column of who voted for whom if they actually should have been registered at that precinct and not at another precinct. So here's the lookup information. It is at the Secretary of State's website. It is my voter registration status, and you just put in someone's first name, last name, date of birth, and zip code, and it tells you, comes up with where they're supposed to vote, who's going to be on the ballot, what their status is, whether they're inactive or whether they're fully registered. It's a very nice site, and we were one of the last states in the union to actually get one, which is rather shocking, but it is in fact the truth. At least we have it now. So we talked a little bit about provisional ballot, but let me just tell you a little bit more about it. Provisional voting was actually required by the Help America Vote Act of 2002. In all federal elections, states must offer provisional ballots. Most offer them in every election, but there's a lot of issues around them about, you know, whether they actually will count, whether the poll workers are following the rules. States actually have different kinds of rules around them and how they resolve those rules. We are one of the stricter states. In some states, if you cast a provisional ballot in the wrong precinct, but you're still able to vote for statewide offices. In Massachusetts, that is not true. So being in the right precinct is very, very important. It's also important that they follow up with the clerk. Sometimes to vote provisionally, if they're a first-time voter, they have to provide identification. We'll talk about that in a minute. And if they don't provide it, they have to vote provisionally, but then they can come back and provide it. Make sure that they know the steps on what to do. Now, often there will be a warden at the polling place that will be going over this with the voter and will be very engaged and will do a great job. And you really won't have to do anything except for, hey, wait a minute. Every third person is missing from this list and is going to get a provisional ballot. There's something wrong, or, you know, I can see that, so that there's a systemic issue. Again, we want to address it. So I think I've made it fairly clear about why regular ballots are better than provisional ballots, because regular ballot counts. There's something called a challenge ballot, which we'll get into that in a minute, and it is also better than a provisional ballot because it counts on election day too. So if someone is told they must vote provisional, and by the way, one of the other issues with provisional voting is that you are entitled to a ballot, and sometimes they won't give it to you because they don't have enough or whatever, but that is wrong. If a voter wants to have one, they deserve to have one. Although if they're in the wrong place, it won't count. So if the voter is told they should vote provisionally, but they think they're registered and they should have a regular ballot, you should look them up on that website that I showed you. And it will include on the location what the registration status is, the polling location, and the precinct. The other thing is that there are multiple lines in many of these polling places, and each line can be related to a set of precincts. And if the voter gets in the wrong line, their name will not be on that list. They'll be at a different list on the other line. If they cast a provisional in the wrong line, even in the same polling place, their ballot won't count. All very, very important. Now, some polling locations, if they're smart, will have somebody at the front directing people to the right line, but that isn't always the case. So in those kind of complicated polling locations, you might have somebody outside with a phone or an iPad trying to help along. Again, you know, they're going to have to get some buy-in from the poll workers. They may tell you you can't do that. You can fight with them. I wouldn't do that, you know, directly. We can try to cajole them and talk to, you know, if it's Boston, we'll talk to the election officials and get permission for you to do that, or they'll send somebody down to do it. So you should encourage them to vote provisionally if we can't find them on the lookup tool. Because, and then, you know, if they can show that actually there was one instance I know of where a family registered all at the same time at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, all the rest of their registrations went through. For some reason, this one, his did not, but from the circumstantial evidence, the clerk determined that he should have been registered, so his provisional was counted. He was added to the rolls, and the ballot was counted. So inactive voting, this is a very, one of the things we run up against a lot and is one of the more confusing areas of law. You only end up an inactive voter in Massachusetts if you don't return your census card for 2 years. Now, Massachusetts has a state census. We're not talking about the federal census that's coming up, sometimes called a street list, but every municipality sends out a census form and asks you how many people are in your household, how many dogs do you have, do you have a car, blah, blah, blah. That is how Massachusetts creates the inactive voting list and our jury list. So someone who doesn't return that card for 2 consecutive years will become an inactive voter. And that inactive voter can have an I next to their name, or they can be on a whole separate list of voters. Sometimes poll workers forget about that second list of voters and turn people away, which is absolutely wrong. If they are inactive, they have to do a number of procedures in order to cast a ballot. They get to vote a regular ballot if they provide an ID showing that they are who they say they are, or they can vote something called a challenge ballot if they are not, if they don't have an ID, which is essentially a regular ballot, but they sign it along with the poll worker's name. They fill out in either case, they fill in an affidavit. And then both of those ballots, a regular ballot or a challenge ballot, counts on election night, and that's better than a provisional ballot. So if they have to provide an ID, what kind of ID do they have to provide? This is not Georgia or some of the other places. This is, Massachusetts has very good, relatively liberal voter identification rules. They follow the Help America Vote Act, which provides a floor for ID and was instituted in 2002. What Help America Vote Act says that first-time voters must provide a form of proof of residency identification before they vote for the first time if they've registered by mail. But these are very, we'll see in a minute, can be utility bill, all sorts of different things. In addition to people, the first-time voters who've registered by mail, a poll worker can say if they have a reasonable doubt that about somebody, they can also ask for some form of ID. And as I said, inactive voters provided as well. First-time voters who do not have that ID have to cast a provisional ballot. Inactive voters who don't have an ID have a challenge ballot. All right, so that's a little confusing. So what kind of IDs are we talking about? It can be obviously a photo ID with a current valid driver's license. You have the right address on it. It can also be a bank statement, a utility bill, a paycheck, anything showing your name and address that is sent to you. Electronic versions of these are okay as well. So what you have on your cell phone would also work. So voter challenges, intimidation, we've seen some of this in Massachusetts. There was a little bit in New Bedford one year, another time in Worcester. There is a possibility of it in Lowell and Lawrence because one of the conservative groups did this voter caging activity before the election, sending a mass mailing and then claiming that when the mail came back as undeliverable that these were invalid voters, and complaining about that to the Secretary of State's office. So we'll see, but there's at least some possibility that could happen here in Massachusetts this election cycle. So in order to challenge a voter that is actually allowed under Massachusetts law, the challenger must provide a specific valid reason. And if challenged, the voter has a right to sign an affidavit and vote a regular ballot. It would be marked the name of the challenger and the specific reasons. But they would have to, the person who is challenging that voter bears the burden of proof. It's not the other way around. The voter doesn't have the burden of proof to show that they are a valid voter. It's the challenger that has to prove that. And a provisional ballot is exactly opposite. The voter has to prove that they should have been on the list. So the only reasons for challenging a ballot are these: the voter is not who they say they are, they do not live where they say they live, they're not registered in the right district, they're not qualified to vote, etc. So, or they've already cast a ballot. It's not sufficient to say, I challenge that person. They have to say one of these very specific reasons. So here's just a comparison between those two things that we have already talked about. But I thought I would just compile a list so that you could look at it quickly and come back to that. I think we've already gone over this, so I won't go over it again. Another area that we see a lot is problems with assistance, and that is that either somebody foisting themselves on unwilling folks who don't want any assistance. That happens very rarely. More often it happens that a disabled voter or a non-English speaker will come in with someone to assist them, and the poll workers will not let that happen. They do have the right for the assistant of their choice, not of the poll worker's choice. So that's something to be aware of. They also have the right to have some kind of assistance. So if they don't speak English, often there will be bilingual poll workers, but sometimes not. And they have a right to have their questions answered and be able. There is an auto mark that can be that is programmed in different languages, so that's sort of the last. That's a kind of a disabled access machine that's in every polling place. That is sort of the last resort, other than person. So one of the issues with the equipment is that they run out of ballots. That has happened here too. I don't think it will happen on this election, or that the equipment breaks down and the ballot feeder isn't working. That is not necessarily fatal because we do have ballots, paper ballots here in Massachusetts, and they can store them in the machine without scanning them in and scan it another time in a public place. Running out of ballots is a big deal. The law requires that every precinct have as many ballots as there are registered voters in that precinct. So no one should ever run out of ballots. I don't need to go into why that happened before, but it did. So if something happens, the machines are down and they don't they don't know how to deal with it, or they have run out of ballots for some reason, we want to know about that immediately. So please call the command center or one of our cell phones. The 1-866 Our Vote hotline is a backup, but really we want to know that as soon as possible. If you can, you want to encourage people to stay online and get as many facts as possible. What happened? How many people are there? When did it start? Try to document who's leaving the line or staying. Occasionally you will have problems with polls opening late. Not closing early, we haven't really seen that in Massachusetts. They do open late occasionally. Sometimes there will be very long lines because of poor planning. Maybe they'll have one of those precincts with polling place with 3 different precincts, or 5 or 10 different precincts, and they're not directing people into the right line. So one line will be really long, and then there'll be nobody over on the other side, and then, so that happens. Or it's just a very high turnout election. They don't have enough people. With early voting, we've eliminated a lot of that. And then, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, we do often, every election we see some inappropriate poll worker behavior. It's rare, it's spotty, it's not condoned by the establishment usually, but it's something that we need to know about and stop. If the polling place isn't open, let us know so we can notify the relevant election official and encourage the voters to wait in line. So what are our voting hours? Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And if you are in line by 8, you're entitled to vote regardless of how long the line is at that time. So usually we'll have somebody come out and stand at the end of where the line is at 8, and then everybody gets to vote. So we're getting to the question part. Here are important numbers. The command center and, of course, the 1-866 Our Vote hotline, which I didn't put here, Sophia's cell phone and my cell phone. And text message is good, particularly if it's not a very detailed question. Email is also possible, a little harder to get, so text message or phone call is probably better to reach us. The 1-866 Our Vote hotline, and then the other ones of a Vota Spanish line, and then the Asian and Arabic lines. And I guess I can't really say enough about when to call the command center, but basically anything where there is a systemic issue, we want to know. And then any individuals, the 1-866 Our Vote hotline, you can literally call for the voter or have the voter call it directly. If they need help, you've got like 5 people that want to have their information looked up. the 1-866 hotline can do that. So here is some more information. This is where you, at Common Cause Election Protection, is where you can get all the materials we talked about, a copy of this video and the slides, the survey, etc. And this is kind of the overview for our state. We will also, there's also a Google Docs folder, which I'll also send out as well. So thanks a lot. And I am going to stop sharing, and we are going to get to Q&A. Let's see. I'm going to see how I can unmute everybody. I think you get to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay. Why don't we have people? I got 2 raised hands here. Where do I do that? Oh, there we go. 3 raised hands. Sarah, can you tell us? And
okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, my first question is, will we know in advance who we're partnered with so that we can make arrangements in advance?
Yes. If you haven't gotten your polling place assignment, you you will get it soon, and you'll be able to email or phone call other folks.
Okay, and if there are 2 of us and we're assigned to more than 1 polling place and we decide to go 1 each, is there a preference? Should one be, would you rather have us, if there's only 1 person, should we be inside or should we be outside?
I think you really need to solve that for yourself. So it depends on what's going on in that polling place. You know, if there's a lot of stuff, there's people causing commotion on the outside, you might want to go out there. You may have noticed that one thing I did not put in this PowerPoint was the 150-foot rule, other than say that you can go in there. We really don't want to know if people are closer to 150 feet unless they are harassing people, blocking traffic, causing trouble. Then we want to know about it. But please do not get out your tape. If they're in the polling place itself, or it's a poll worker doing that, obviously we want to know about that too. You know, Boston, for example, often will have something more like 50 feet or 75 feet, and that's just, that's not a problem. We don't really want to know about it. If, again, is harassment happening, we want to know about that. So, Anjali?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I have 2 questions. One question is related to this last one. If I'm with my partner I signed up with, and one is outside and one is inside, and say the one inside, you know, is sort of thinks they're observing something and wants to say I'm inside and my mom's outside, and I just want her to come in and hang with me for a few minutes to see what she thinks. Is it acceptable to have 2 of us inside at the same time, or does it need to be just 1?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely.
Okay, so that was thing 1. Thank you. And thing 2 is a separate thing. Is how could I get a hold of a button, pin, T-shirt, some identifying thing for the election protection program?
So you can either come in, if you're in town, you can come by either my office or Sophia's office.
Okay.
Or if you shoot me an email, I can mail you a button.
Okay.
So.
You think it would get here in time? I suppose because
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So we have an answer here about a question about type question, do we print out our own materials and how many do we bring? So yes, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of administrative support either at Common Cause or the Lawyers Committee. So if you can print out your own materials, please do. Some of them are for your own use that are sort of background legal materials. That's up to you whether you want to bring them or not. There are, in terms of palm cards, you don't need to bring too many. They're 4 up on a 8.5 by 11 sheet. So you could print out, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 copies of this sheet. So you have 40, 60 palm cards to bring with you, or whatever you feel is appropriate and you want to do. You could go to a copy shop if you really needed to, but that's the only public facing document. There is the polling place survey, which is a single sheet of paper. So you would want to bring one for each polling place that you're assigned to. Or if you talk to your partner, I mean, one person could do it for all three polling places. If you just have one polling place, you might just want to do that one. But 3 sheets of paper isn't a lot. If you can't print anything out and we don't get anything to you on time, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. So Alice has a question. She doesn't, all right, I'll try. Alice, you got promoted to be a panelist because that was the only way I could let you talk. Do you have a question?
Yes, it's really similar to the very first question. I've never done this before. The person I'm partnered with has already contacted me and asked if we should each go to one site or we should go together. And I guess I would like some advice about that. I mean, it seems sort of random to try to figure out, is it more important that somebody, my first thought was, let's cover the 2 sites. But is it more important that there be somebody at each of the 2 sites, or that, you know, we work together as a team at one site? I really don't understand, like, why 2 of us.
It's your preference. If it was me, I would rather divide and conquer, but a lot of people do not feel comfortable doing that. So it really is something that you and your partner need to figure out together. The more ground you cover, the more you will see. We actually often feel that good and really understand it, often drive around and go to polling places that aren't even theirs just to see what's happening and report back. But it really, you're gonna have to do what is comfortable for you.
Okay.
Sheila, do you have a question? No, Julia.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to unmute.
Okay.
All right. Actually, I have several. I got a schedule that said shift times, but unless I'm not missing something, it doesn't say what time it actually is.
Yeah. So the times have been pretty standard. They're what you signed up for. The first one is 6:30 to 10. If you're not there right at 6:30, don't worry about it. Do what you can. The second is
I'm on the 4th one.
well, let me just tell you what they all are. The
Okay.
second is 10 to 1:30. The third is 1:30 to 5, and the fourth is 5 to 8:30. It won't probably last till 8:30. It'll probably be 8 o'clock. You know, in all of these, use your judgment. If you're freezing your butt off, or you know you really don't feel well and you need to go home, you go home. You take care of yourself. You are the most important resource. If there is a problem and you need to leave, but you're watching a problem happening, you know, let us know, because maybe we'll shift somebody over there. We're relying on you as our eyes and ears. But a lot of times the poll workers are doing a great job and there's really no problem. And that's a good story to be telling too.
Do we, is there a possibility that we might be harassed by people?
No, I don't mean by harassed, but
By other watchers or people who don't think we should be there, or that's not usually a problem?
So if you're inside the polling place, nobody's talking to anybody, including on the outside. It's possible that if you're sort of inside the 150-foot rule, somebody may say, hey, you don't have a right to be here. You got to go back to the 150-foot spot. That is not true. You do have the right. But if it's an official in the worker telling you that, you can say, hey, look, we're observers. We're not campaigning for this. I have a right to do this. But just leave it at that. No confrontation. We want to keep everything very low key. Don't escalate anything. We haven't really seen that happen. We have seen sometimes our people get a little belligerent. We don't want that to happen. So everybody just take a deep breath and report any problems, and we will help to solve it.
Okay. Just as for my interest, who might challenge a voter?
So we do have an organization called Mass Fiscal Alliance who sent out a caging mailing. Otherwise, it can be True the Vote has come to Worcester sometimes. Sometimes it could be a crazy citizen. We're never really sure. So I'm going to move on because there are other questions. Thank you. All right, Julia. Oh, Julia, I have to promote you to a panelist. Where are you? There you are.
I think I lost track of my question, but another question popped up. If we're two people and we're each at one of our locations, is your preference for us to be inside or outside?
I think that's pretty similar to the question we just answered. So wherever you feel is the best place, you will usually have more than one polling place. Most of the action is usually on the inside rather than the outside, but it depends on the place. I mean, if you have somebody outside that's being disruptive, then you're going to want to be out there. And the polling workers are doing great. If you have problems with a poll worker who's not letting people vote provisionally, or is telling people they're not on the list and not checking the inactive voting list, then you're going to want to be inside. So it's a little bit fluid.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, Gabriella.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify the challenge versus provisional ballot. Am I understanding correctly that the challenge is if they are on a list but someone challenges them, then they would be voting on a challenge. They would not need a provisional ballot because they are on a list but someone's challenging them.
That's correct. And if they're inactive, so they're not on the main list, but they're on the secondary list, they also get a challenge ballot.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I see this. Does Sarah, do you have another question, Sarah, or?
I do have another question. It seems to me, if I'm the only person at a particular location, that my first step is to go inside and introduce myself and get a blessing from the folks inside. And that at that point, then I could, if I understand correctly, I could move in or out as appropriate. But that I first should make sure that they know I'm there and that it's okay for me to be there.
So the first thing you want to do is to kind of look around for some of the accessibility issues and just get a lay of the land. But you want to go in, introduce yourself to the warden. My suggestion would be, if you don't see anything happening outside, to tell the warden you're an observer, you're here to watch. They will usually give you a seat behind the check-in table. Again, you need to silence your phone, not take anything, not interact with people. And then if you do, you can leave the voting area, although if there's a lot of watchers, you may give up your seat. You can leave the voting area if you see somebody who's been turned away and you want to follow them outside. Or you need to use a restroom or get some food, or, you know, there's lots of different reasons. You can't actually eat there. You need to take a break. You could also decide, I need some air. I want to get outside for a little while because it's too hot in here, or whatever. That's all good.
But as a general principle, you and your partner, even if there's two of you, you should, after making your observations, you should go in about accessibility, et cetera. You should go in and introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your partner might want to go to the other polling location and leave you there after you've kind of done your first walk around together. Or, you know, you might want to go and introduce yourself, one person outside, one person inside. I think if you're both sitting there, you know, you might be a little overkill, but again, we're going to leave that to your discretion of how comfortable you feel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So let's see. Sarah, do you have another question, or are you good? Or Anjali, do you have another question? Anjali, did you have another question?
I do have another question.
Okay.
And that is, you mentioned just now in your previous answer to the previous question, the possibility of there being several other watchers. And so I'm wondering, what is the chance of that, and who would they be? What other organizations may be sending observers, watchers, and is that being coordinated at all among the various organizations?
So there will be other watchers, most likely. Well, maybe not, but they're not from our kind of world. They would be from the Democratic Party or from the Republican Party or from one of the candidates' direct campaigns. So they're stationed there, and they follow who's checked in, and they check it off on their list, and they report it back to headquarters so that they can get out their vote. So that's a very, very common thing. There will be plenty of people from the campaigns and or parties there. I
see. And so is there a limit? You know, per polling station to how many watchers there could be? I mean, is it conceivable that somebody would say, look, we've already got, you know, 13 watchers here or whatever.
Yes.
We don't need another. Then what should we do at that point?
Go outside or go to a different polling place.
Okay. Thanks.
Gabriella, did you have another question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I forgot to lower my.
Okay. Kate, did you have a question? Oops. Sorry. Kate, okay. Did you have a
I do. I had to unmute for a second. Can you hear me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if I understand, you keep stressing that we really have no interaction with the workers who are there after we introduce ourselves. So if we see something, and depending upon how large the polling area is, like I'm thinking about this in the context of my polling place, which is a field house, because the whole town votes in it. I may think I'm seeing something, but I may not be sure that I'm seeing, a lot of people being turned away. But I should not speak to anybody to clarify my perception. I should just let you guys know what I think I'm seeing.
Well, you can follow the voter out and ask them what their experience is.
Okay.
To understand it better. After certain circumstances, you can go to the warden. You just don't go to the check-in people, the people that are doing the issues. You don't go to them and tell them you're doing this wrong or what are you doing. You need to have enough evidence that you're going to interrupt the flow of the day. I mean, these people are busy. They're doing their job. Nobody likes to be told they're doing something wrong. So we want to make sure that everything is very clear. So there are circumstances where you will be talking to the warden. But again, we try to, every intervention is a confrontation to a certain extent. So we want to make sure that we're doing it smart and that we're not doing it too soon.
Okay.
That make sense?
Yes, it does.
I have a question here about if we're not wearing the official T-shirt, do we just introduce ourselves to voters as election monitors when we interact with them outside? You can have a button. You could make your own. Button if you wanted. You can hand them a little piece of paper. It's fine to introduce yourself as a volunteer with the Election Protection Coalition, and that you're there to help, and you have the 1-866-OUR-VOTE hotline. I think it would be good to have something that says the 1-866-OUR-VOTE hotline and the various numbers so you don't forget about them, and the URL for looking up the voter registration information. Those are all important things to have as you go along. So we are over our time a little bit. So here's a question. Does the person outside the poll have a function? The person outside of the poll has a function of, one, seeing what trouble might be, but also informing voters of their rights, maybe gathering voter stories. How was your experience voting? Did you have any problems? No, it was great. It was really wonderful. What do you think about the election? Well, you probably want to get at that. Or no, it was kind of frustrating. I felt like somebody was looking over my shoulder. Would you mind telling me more about that? So the person on the outside is assisting voters and gathering information. The person on the inside is gathering information and maybe coming back out to assist voters. Does that make sense? Okay, so I don't see any more raised hands. If anyone else has any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I've just unmuted a bunch of people. Otherwise, we'll call it a night, and thank you very much for coming, and feel free to send an email with other questions and we will answer them in the future. So thanks so much. Take care. Have a good night.
All right, thanks. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.